Hello and good day to all of you. Today we are going to discuss about the topic longitudinal and sporadic fact collection techniques. If you can recall our previous lecture series, we have discussed about multiple fact collection techniques. But today we are going to discuss about some special situations. One is this longitudinal situation and the sporadic situation. What are those? Longitudinal study, as you can clearly see from this diagram, it is a study which will last for a longer time period, longer time span. So you can clearly understand fact collection mechanisms like interviews is not going to work because interview is a pre-planned setup. But we cannot conduct interviews continuously for a longer time periods. Therefore, we have to seek for some other alternatives if our concern is about longitudinal observations associated with our HCI design requirements. The other situation is sporadic, right? So it's something irregular or unexpected situations, right? You might have witnessed in certain days we have sun and rain both together. Some unexpected situations, irregular events, those will occur precisely without any prior notifications. Therefore, again, interviews are not going to work because, as I mentioned earlier, interview is a predefined setup. But how can you arrange an interview for a precise unexpected situation? So that aspect will clearly reveal that interview is not the final or the total solution for all the occurrences, right? We have to seek for some other alternatives to overcome these recurring problems associated with other approaches or other mechanisms of observations. So let's look into this in detail. So as I already elaborated, interviews will not going to work because in longitudinal approach, it's for a very large time span, and in sporadic, it's unexpected. Therefore, we cannot have a predefined setup to conduct interviews. Hence, in that sort of a situation, as the HCI designer, you reach to the stakeholders' premises and to stay for a longer time period to conduct the observations is not going to work. And also for irregular and unexpected events recording, you might not be there, right? Therefore, HCI engineer alone cannot handle this aspect. Therefore, when we are tackling with longitudinal or sporadic approaches, sporadic situations, we request the stakeholders or the participants support, right? So say for an example, if we are going to develop a HCI interface series for a pharmacy, you need the stakeholders, mainly the pharmacist or the cashier, the people who are daily functioning in that organizational unit to assist you to conduct this experiment, right? So that is why I emphasize here, we invite the participants to become the observers. So in most cases, we request the employees of the organizations, officers of the organization of concern, to actively involve as participants and observers to facilitate this longitudinal or sporadic associated observation requirements. So I already elaborated that interviews will not going to work. Therefore, we have to introduce some other alternative mechanisms. So for longitudinal or sporadic studies, we have identified some other alternative mechanisms as listed here. Those are diary studies, experience sampling, lead users, extreme users, and personas. So let's try to understand each of these one by one. Before commencing of the HCI experiment, as the HCI designers or engineers, we can educate our participants about the important aspects that we are concerned about. So if I refer to my same previous pharmacy example, as the HCI designers, we can discuss with the pharmacist, another supportive aides who are working in the pharmacy, or the cashier or the owner of the pharmacy. We can elaborate them about our observation requirements, and what to be recorded, what to be concerned about, what are the things to be observed, right? And then we request them to maintain a diary, and we advise them how to record all these things in a diary to facilitate later reference. Why we are inviting the organizational employees? Because this is, as I mentioned earlier, longitudinal or a sporadic, which means runs for a longer time period, or it could be irregular, unexpected. Therefore, it's only the organizational employees who can assist us, right? So we request them to maintain a diary, and we educate them beforehand, before we commence the experiment, what are the aspects that they should be vigilant on, that they should be looking after. And we request them, upon specific timings, record all your findings, right? Record all your observations in a diary in a specifically defined or introduced template, which is easy for the HCI engineers to analyze later without any information loss. For an example, as visible in this slide, we can request at every evening before you leave your office premises, record your experiences in the diary, right? What are these experiences? How happy are you, right? How tired are you? How successful are you? Because we need to consider about those live user interactions. Say for an example, if the pharmacy is already computerized, and if the interfaces of that legacy system which is currently running in the pharmacy is not user friendly, then at the end of the day, pharmacists or the cashiers, they would be really tired, right? And they will not feel happy, right? And they will not feel successful. We need all these aspects to be jot down in the diary, and we have to specifically emphasize what factors cause them to lose their energy, which are the repetitive tasks, which are the work burdens, which are the work overloads that they have to go through in their routine tasks. And when interacting with customers, there might be different type of customers, they have different type of demands. And how effective are you as the cashier or the pharmacist in fulfilling those customers requirements? Are you satisfied? Are you successful? At the end of the day, do you feel happy? We need all this information, right? So that is why we enforce the diary studies. Maybe a particular customer is coming without the prescription and requesting you for a particular medication via specifying certain informations ad hocly. So that is a special situation where we could consider that as a sporadic situation, unexpected situation, irregular situation. So you can log that as well in your diary, right? Because that is also a specific type of experience that you went through at the end of the day, right? So that is why this, for longitudinal or sporadic studies, this diary studies approach is very crucial, because as I mentioned, it is capable of capturing events which have a lengthy time span, or it is capable of capturing unexpected and irregular events. Therefore, we identify one of the biggest advantage of the diary studies is higher scalability, and that means you can keep on adding information, right? Daily you can keep on adding information, and you can scale, you can scale your information repository to a great extent, and it is very good in tracking longer period operations. Another example, say a particular customer might be providing you a credit card to do the payment for his or her purchases. Another one would be providing a debit card, right? But maybe your system might not be supporting. So what are the difficulties that you have to go through as the cashier of the pharmacy, right? So likewise, you will not be able to trace those things only for one day, right? Because you are dealing with different type of customers, you are getting variety of experiences. That is why we need to be concerned about the longitudinal or sporadic approaches as well in capturing information for the appropriate HCI designing. Moving forward, the next strategy that is being introduced is experience sampling, right? Now again I would like to stick to this pharmacy example. So we will try to identify a few important stakeholders, maybe the pharmacist, cashier, and the owner of the pharmacy, or maybe a particular regular customer, frequent customer who is visiting to the pharmacy. Dif- uh, they might have their own angles of experiences which they would like to express, right? That is also very important. As a customer to the pharmacy, what do you feel? Do you feel happy? Do you feel sad? Do you lose your energy? Have you accomplished your requirement? As a owner of the pharmacy, what is his or her opinion, perception? As the pharmacist, what do you think? Different experiences, right? These varying experiences are also very important because different people can look at the same problem in different angles, right? Same problem in different angles. That is very important aspect that we should be looked into, because that aspect is very crucial in providing user related customizations for the interfaces that they are dealing with once this new intended system is deployed for the pharmacy, right? So you can trigger people at the certain timings, right? You can maybe you can set an alarm, right? You are requesting, you are educating your stakeholders before you commence the experiment every day, right? At 11:50 you are setting up the alarm, right? So when the alarm is beeping, different people, pharmacist, maybe a customer who is at the pharmacy at that time, then the owner, we request them to jot down the experiences that they have gathered so far. Say the pharmacy opened at 9 a.m. in the morning, so from 9 a.m. up to 11:50 a.m. during that time span, what have you gathered? Jot all these experiences, right? Because different angles, different perceptions associated with the same problem is very important. So experience sampling can be connected, easily connected with the diary studies, right? So we could anticipate, we could define, this is a collaboratory approach. Diary studies and experience sampling, those things go together in hand. Yes, the next important approach is getting or extracting lead users experiences. Who are the lead users? Lead users are the people who are effectively functioning in a particular organization for a longer time period, right? Because of that, they have gained extensive, immense amount of experiences about the type of the transaction of the organization or the business, type of interactions that they have to go through. With this immense amount of experiences for the longer period of time, and as a result of successful operational experience of this lead user for a longer time, they might have clever solutions how to deal with the people, how to reduce the workload. Say for an example, if you go for a photocopying center, if there are a new novice photocopy operator and a very old and experienced photocopy operator, if you give the same amount of paper bundles to be copied, most of the time the experienced user will complete with higher accuracy, higher quality, and with of lesser time. Why is that? Because of the experience. Sometimes the new person or the apprentice might not be able to do like that. That is why we need to concerned about the knowledge stored inside the brains of these lead users, because they might be having clever solutions that they have derived as a result of immense experience for a longer time period of the same operation, business operation, and these clever solutions could trigger into new insights, great insights, which will facilitate the HCI designs in numerous ways, leading to a effective and optimized resolution. As lead users with their longer stay, they might have tackled various type of customers, complex customers, bargaining customers, So how to handle that sort of situations? They contain massive amount of knowledge. As HCI engineers, we need to extract that knowledge to facilitate our computer system to operate in the most optimal way. Now, this use case reported in Boston Hospital is a very good example to emphasize the importance of the knowledge of these lead users. Dr. Nathaniel Zim works as an anesthesiologist in this Boston hospital. He used to carry a lot of medical equipments when he is rushing for the various emergencies to the operation theater and for various other patient treatment requirements. So in those situations he had to carry multiple medical equipments where it was extremely difficult, and sometimes once he reached to the operation theater he noticed that he has not collected another important equipment, so he has to again go back to his office and collect all these new equipment. So it is a hassle for Dr. Nathaniel. So what he has done, as a result of this, all these adverse experiences that he came across for a longer time period, he created the special rack which can hold all these medical equipments, and it's a trolley where then when he is walking to the operation theater he can easily pull this trolley with all these medical equipments without losing anything. So it was referred as NatRack. So that the idea of NatRack became as an outcome of the immense amount of experience converted into a form of a new exploration. That is how new knowledge triggering occurs, which will lead to greater insights. That is why we are telling the knowledge extraction from the lead users is also very vital. Very vital. Right. After discussing about the lead users, next we are going to discuss about extreme users. Who are they? Say, let's try to understand this again with an example. Assume the amount of emails that you get per day as an ordinary person, and assume the amount of the emails a CEO of a Silicon Valley company will get for a day, right? It has a vast variance. You might get 1 or 2 or 3, maybe 10 emails per day as an ordinary user or a student, but the Silicon Valley CEO might get maybe several hundreds or maybe thousands of emails per one day. So people who are dealing with large amount of information develop specific strategies. They have specific rationale, intelligence to tackle with their extreme amount of information, right? Just to avoid the information being overloaded. So we can interview that sort of people. As an extreme user, how would you tackle the extreme generation of emails? How can you ensure that you will not miss any of the emails? What is the process that you are using to handle your emails, the large bulks of emails that you are getting per day? That is a very important axiom. That is a very important aspect. As HCI engineers, we should be looked into, because those strategies that they will be following or that they are following so far for a longer time period can reach to new insights in our design, right? So as the lead users, extreme users feedbacks, inputs are also extremely vital if we are planning to reach for an optimal HCI based design. Yes, the next salient point which we are going to discuss is about the personas, right? Now, say for an example, there are two peoples, say person X and person Y. If you hand over a very complex coordination task to a person X, he or she will handle that very effectively. But person Y might end up with lot of problems without reaching to the final accomplishment. So what is the difference? Person X might be using his or her own mechanism or own process to tackle or just to drill down the complexity of the task to a manageable portions. whereas person Y might be lacking that. So that we refer as personas. The task routines, or we can model the task routines or task processes associated with different people, right? Same task given to person A and person B and person C, they might follow their own processes which might have pros and cons, and efficiencies might be varying, right? So we can associate those individual specific processes used by those individuals to complete the given task as personas. Say for an example, how John used his printer to complete all printing jobs in one day, whereas Ben might need 10 days to complete that. So that is a persona associated with the John and a persona associated with the Ben. The specific modeled task routines associated with the individuals. So we have to consider about those personas. There are some outshining employees in organizations who are very methodical and who can do very complex tasks with higher accuracy with lesser amount of resources and time constraints. So we need to interview those people and we have to extract their persona associated knowledge, because that might be very vital when we are defining our HCI systems. Yes, the next aspect that we are going to discuss about the design goals. Now, using variety of fact collection mechanisms, we have come up with a workflow to gather the information, salient information, even in longitudinal and sporadic situations as well, where interviews might fail. Okay, now we have gathered the information. So next vital step is to use this information rationally and to come up with effective and rationalized HCI designs. Before directly go into the HCI designs, we have to understand our design goals. So I would like to highlight this case of Herb, Simon and the ant. So Herb was once observing the behavior or the walking style of an ant, right? So while he was placing various obstacles to the ant's pathway, and where ant is going through the obstacles, right? So if you change the external items, your surroundings, right, the workflow or the path that you need to follow is also going to be changed, right? So as you can see in this slide, in a nutshell, if we can tell, if the environment changes, ants behavior is also changes. In the same way, if the environment changes, what will happen? The interaction patterns of the customers or the pharmacist or the owner or all the stakeholders will change. So therefore, we have to identify the atmospheric requirements when we are putting our step for the HCI designing, right? Before we blindly start with the HCI designing, we have to understand the design goals. So be vigilant, be careful about your environment, and be cautious about all the interactions, right? You have to define your design goals in a way to facilitate all these interactions, right? Therefore, you need to have a very cautious and a watchful eye about all the interactions and the business transactions taking place in your surroundings, right? Because the ultimate goal of designing is what? To transform the extreme situations into preferred situations, right? You want to do some task without wasting a lot of energy, time and effort. You want to complete the task and save your energy levels, and you should end the task with a joyful mindset. How can we do that? Design matters a lot, right? Therefore, we have to conduct our observations. Now we have conducted the observations and we have utilized multiple fact collection mechanisms as we have discussed so far, and we have gathered all the information, and before we directly start with the designing, according to the Herb, Simon and Arndt case, right, we should be very concerned about our design goals, right? So how can we make the design goal mechanism more realistic, right? The suggested approach to follow is activity analysis, right? Activity analysis. Activity analysis comprises of multiple sections as steps, artifacts, goals, how to measure the success, and pain points, right? So this activity analysis is very useful mechanism to take all stakeholders into the same page. Why? If different stakeholders are telling, no, this approach is not going to work, my approach is going to work. Another one is telling, no, that is not going to work, my one is going to work. So it is going to be very irrational and very ineffective bargaining, where you will reach to no satisfactory end results, right? Therefore, we have to have a proper mechanism like activity analysis associated with our design goals, right? In my previous slide, I highlighted about the importance of the design goals, and now we are going to introduce a practical workflow to share the perception associated with the design goal with all the involved stakeholders. Let's try to understand with a small example. Let's try to apply this activity analysis for a situation of driving a car, right? Or the design goals associated to be accomplished, right? Design goals to be accomplished associated with a scenario like driving a car, right? Steps. What are the steps that you have to follow, right? Say you want to have a key, right? Then you have to put the key to the door lock, open it, go inside, right? Then you have to sit on the driving seat, place your key in the ignition slot, turn it towards the right side to the on position, and again slide more towards the right side for the start position, and you will experience the engine is cranking, right? Once the engine started, again set your key to the on position via slightly shifting it towards the left side. Now you have started the car, right? So those are the steps, right? But we miss certain steps, isn't it? First we have to check whether the car is in the neutral gear, right? Or if it is engaged with the first gear or the reverse gear, it might end up with a lot of damage, right? So we miss certain steps. That is why we need to be worried about the stepwise sequence, right? Stepwise sequence. That is why activity analysis plays a vital role to finalize our design goals, right? So ensure the gear stick as well, whether it is at the neutral position before you start your vehicle, right? So those are the steps. Then what are the artifacts? Artifacts in the sense the objects that you have to deal through, right? So we had the key, we had the ignition key holder, then the gear stick, door, steering wheel, the seat, right? So those are the artifacts. What are the goals? What is the goal? Goal is to drive the car, right? You cannot directly drive the car. Why? You need to start the car first, right? So where the goal is comprising with some sub goals, right? First start the car, right? Then you might have to reverse the car, turn it round, right? If you are inexperienced, reversing might be very difficult for you, right? So what are those? Those are pain points. What are the pain points, right? Maybe if your car is a manual car, clutch balancing might be very difficult for you, right? And the reversing, looking at the side mirrors and properly steering, right? If you have to take your car out to a narrow road, very difficult, right? So those are the pain points, right? Then how to measure the success, right? What are the criteria that you are defining to measure the success? So we have to consider about all those aspects when we are finalizing our design goal, right? Then we can define some key criteria to measure the success, right? Maybe the time taken for you to reverse the car and take it out, your energy level. Do you feel happy or sad or tensed after you put your car to the main road via going through the narrow road, via putting a lot of effort to turn your car and take it out of your house? Do you feel happy? Likewise, you can refer some criteria points to measure the success of the entire activity. So I think now you are familiar with the steps, artifacts, goals, pain points, and the criteria that we have to define, right? That is situational specific to determine the success, right? Because the ultimate goal of designing is what? To amplify the joy and to reduce the pains, right? That is very important. We have to, the ultimate design goal should be amplify the joy and reduce the pain. What are the situations or what are the steps associated with the existing design which will affect the user's joy or which will make the user very tensed or stressed? Do we have any other alternative ways to address those steps? That is the important aspect where we need design refinements. So the design goal refinements needs to be taken place. Likewise, this activity analysis coupled with the design goals are very vital before we blindly reach to finalized HCI designs. Okay, then before I stop, thank you very much for listening to this lecture, and we'll discuss some more very important point associated with HCI designing in forthcoming lectures. Until then, goodbye.